ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train. This is episode 224, and I am your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man. And, of course, if you want to see this footage in real time, go watch Under Construction for this week. It'll be coming out at about the same time, even though it's late. Sorry, got a new job. Things are hectic. Anyways, I'm trying to keep up as best I can. At the very least, you're going to get all the videos, just maybe a little bit late. So, with that said, today's question is, actually, I already had it open, but I just went to read my little blurb, and I just wrote high speed. This is the second part of the sort of two-part question that we started before the route review 2 weeks ago. And it's by Eastrail 11, posted on number 200, episode 200. And he goes, also, did you ever run high speed on the Northeast Corridor? Also, if you ever used a gun, what was it? I've talked about my guns a lot, although I personally didn't have a lot of them. But anyways, the train had plenty. I've got some episodes coming up that'll talk about that, although a little ways down the line. Did you ever run high speed on the Northeast Corridor? Now, it depends what you define as high speed. Under the Zombie Train, before we were incorporated, we probably didn't go more than like 60 or 65. And even then, that is really pushing it for, 3254 or Mikado Blount. It was rare that we did something like that, because even though, it is the apocalypse after all, or well, during World War Z, things could be fairly urgent. The most important thing was keeping the engine in operable condition. If we broke something, especially if we were far from home, we could have been in very, very deep trouble. I've talked about the way the power was generated for the train, and we didn't have any way of generating passive power that wasn't gasoline-based, and gasoline was a little bit difficult to come by, as I've talked about. And in fact, I've got, in 5 episodes, there's a thing about the diesel transition, so I'll be talking about it again. But anyways, I digress. If we weren't moving, we weren't making power, we weren't in a very good position to remain alive. So it was keep moving, keep the engine able to move, and thus don't stress it out too much. There were a lot of incidents, I guess? I don't know if that's a viable word there. I'm not sure if it's a word at all, actually. But I don't know what I'm thinking of then. Maybe indices, which wouldn't make sense. Either way. So, we generally kept to a speed of about 40 miles an hour under the Zombie Train. Or 50 if we needed to get some, or if we were going a great distance, it'd be about 50. And if there was really emergency, then we would say, okay, whatever track speed is for the area, or just as fast as we can get the engine up to. Which, again, by my own estimate, was probably about 60. Or 65. Anyways, once the Zombie Train Incorporated came around, that was when we started being able to take advantage of high-speed engines, and I've talked about some of them in the past. If I want to bring up the roster here, which I could, but you can just think about the higher-speed engines that are available in the U.S. Now, this includes the large UP engines. It includes most of the Northerns that are available, including 611, which at this point in time, I don't think was operating. We had to get her back into operating condition, which wasn't that hard. But, and 4449, and additionally the other engines which were designed specifically for speed. Like, I'm thinking of, I'm thinking of a different engine. There's like the Santa Fe Hudson, that was a good one. And the Blue Goose and the other Hudson, the C&O one. As well as the Jubilee, actually. The Jubilee that's in Steamtown, although it has a sister, I believe, up in Canada, which we were making use of as well. Those went pretty quick, but most of the time we were limited to track speed, which was about 80, 85 miles an hour tops, except for on the Northeast Corridor, which we did use occasionally. The issue was, the Northeast Corridor is a nice big break in the middle when you're trying to avoid New York City, and additionally, if you're going from one side of the Hudson to the other and avoiding New York City, you have to run the Selkirk Hurdle, which is a 200-mile detour up the Hudson River. That was difficult. Additionally, defending the bridge in Albany and that whole area was incredibly difficult when we were actually trying to restore some semblance of back and forth. We eventually decided that we were going to send a small group of people into Penn Station in order to secure the entrances on one side and the other, just so that we could put trains through New York City. That didn't work. The first group we sent in there was immediately overrun, and all died. Later we came back on a second attempt. Now the first group was actually sent in on foot, which was probably their downfall. They didn't have an easy means of escape, but they figured that they would be able to be covert enough and not attract enough zombie attention to scope out the area and get back to us, and that didn't happen. So, additionally, I may say, before I get back to that, most of the engines didn't go too far from their home territory. We had a couple of roving engines, which I'll talk about in a second, but the Penn Station thing, we later got down in there, once we got electricity back, we got down in there with an electric locomotive. It was, I can't remember if it was a toaster or a HHP-8. Originally, it was one of those two. We went down there with that. We got through the other side without an incident, which was surprising. But they just left the main line tracks open, which was very nice of those Penn Station dispatchers. And then, and of course, we had no way to verify this, and when we just had a steam locomotive, going down into Penn Station was not smart for any length of time. You could blow through there and out the other side, which is what we did eventually, but until then, no. We weren't going to try that in case we got stuck down there and suffocated. And then it was, we had a set of Metro North thingies, like electric multiple units, that we'd use to shuttle people from one side to the other, and when we really had to, then we would run a train straight through there. We started adopting, after we had a couple of close calls with trains getting stuck, we started adopting a policy like the Boston and Maine, where we would have electric engines ready outside of Penn Station, and you'd pull up in a steam train, couple on an electric engine, they'd pull you through and out the other side, and you'd uncouple and keep going. And that actually worked fairly well. And that was a really major operational change that I didn't even think of for far too long before it actually came to reality. I was sort of, we were doing some work around the Hoosick Tunnel, and I saw what's left of the pylons and went, wow, why didn't I think of that earlier? Anyways, the fastest things that we had, and these are engines that went on the corridor and beyond, we had an engine that didn't carry very much, but could definitely make the speed, and that was 999. Now, when we were planning on getting 999 operational, which that was a chore in and of itself, and we probably would have left her alone if it weren't for her history. But then again, there wasn't really any engine we could leave alone. We even considered fishing 3666 out of the bottom of the bay there in Portland, Maine. But no. After they tried to forcibly dissolve that, there was basically not enough left to even make an engine out of. It just isn't worth it. So 999 though, we immediately went, do we have the capability to put the giant drivers back on this locomotive? And the answer, at that point in time, was yes. And I said, do it. So, that thing, now, it did not crack 100, by my reckoning. It got up to about 90 miles an hour, and started to cap out. We did have kind of a load on that engine when we were running it. But that's because this was used as sort of an emergency, you need to get somewhere fast engine. And, I mean, along the corridor, we could get, I want to say reliable, but it really wasn't. We could get passable electrification on a good amount of the corridor. So if we really needed to get somewhere in an electric, or if we needed to get somewhere along the corridor, we sometimes would juice just the sections that we needed up. That wasn't the best idea because we didn't generate a lot of electricity overall, and that was a lot of power drain from the nearby communities or whatever we were using that electricity for, which there was plenty to use it for. So $9.99 was a good alternative. Then, now before these words come out of my mouth, I've said this before, before these words come out of my mouth, let me say, this was not my idea. So, we came upon, at one point, and this was after Zombie Train Incorporated, we were scouring all the museums, blah 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 blah. We came upon the half-completed CAD drawings and, actual drawings for 5550, the T1. And we're looking over them, and I'm sort of, going, oh, wouldn't it be cool? And Weibold stops me and he goes, this is actually a good idea. And I asked him why, and he said, because it's big enough and powerful enough and fast enough that if we put some armor on it, which we did, it looked kind of dumb, but we put it looked just a little bit chubby. Then we could have an engine that could get us anywhere in the country within a few days and would not have to worry about anything. And I agreed, and then we made this armored T1 thing with all the bells and whistles you could possibly put on a locomotive. We were going through old drawings, not CAD, just like drafting drawings of, the Q2 to figure out how they did the anti-slip mechanism, trying to apply that to the T1, which we did with limited success. And, we didn't have computers or anything. We didn't really trust patching something like that into, that. We weren't going to meddle with the plans too much. But we tried to pack as much into this engine as we realistically could, and what came out was a masterpiece. It was clunky for a T1. It didn't like to accelerate as quickly as you'd hope, but when it got up to speed, it could fly, and I'm talking 120 miles an hour, 125, we could beat out the regional's time, or the Acella's time if we really wanted to. Oh, that's including the Acela station stops, of course, but we could beat out their time from Boston to Washington and, have some despair. It was ridiculous is what it was, being able to have this engine. And that is the fastest that we went, no doubt, until we started moving away from steam locomotives. The 5550 remained in the fleet, or actually it was a different number under us, it was like 1408. It remained in the fleet for a while afterwards and sort of dealt with the private train, or really the emergency train, because we didn't use a private train to get too many places after we got a decent supply of helium. But yeah, no, that was the stroke of genius that propelled us faster than 120 miles an hour. So, from $9.99 to electric helpers to 1408, or whatever it was, the duplex, we did get up to plenty of speed when we were out there. Now, eventually we could bring full electrification back to the corridor, and that was something that we successfully did, and it was one of the first projects that actually started shifting steam out of service in places. There aren't too many places in the U.S. where you've got electrified main lines. In fact, the only two major ones I can think of are the Corridor and the Keystone. The Northeast Corridor and the Keystone Corridor. And the Keystone Corridor was not trafficked enough for us to worry about. We were using generally the water level route for trains going in that direction because they had to use the Selkirk Hurdle anyways. So, add to the fact that it doesn't go too far, but whatever. And you have to deal with Horseshoe Curve and everything like that. The Pennsylvania's route is kind of a pain to run a train over when you've got the water level as an alternative, and it's out of the way. But, anyways, we took that thing and we flew. So, I hope that answers your question. And continue leaving more questions. I'd love to answer them, and I'll see you next week. Trainman out.